Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started.
He downplayed the importance of his job to friends, brushing it off with ease and indifference. But inside, he was nurturing a plan to make things right. Whoever reads this, tell me, how do you heal the heart of someone you've hurt deeply, especially when that person trusted you more than anyone? I'm searching for an answer to that question, feeling like I've broken something that may never be repaired. I don't know whom I can trust, so I'm turning here, hoping someone might understand or offer advice. My heart feels like it's being torn apart, and the worst part is that it's all my fault. If only I could take back those careless words, a foolish joke that seemed harmless, but now leaves me in complete turmoil. I was thoughtless, maybe even cruel, and now I realize the damage I've caused. It's too late, and now all I can do is face the pain I've inflicted. Regret has become a constant weight on my shoulders, eating me up from within. My name is Penelope, and to maintain privacy, let's call my husband Owen. We've been married for 12 years, long enough that I should know better. For Owen, his work is more than just a job. He approaches it with complete dedication and pride. Owen is a kind, patient man, fully devoted to everything he does, especially to us. I stay home, looking after the house, and often reflect on how lucky I am, or rather, how I should feel grateful. Instead of appreciating all he does, I wasted time on petty complaints and gossip. That was my mistake, my thoughtless words. These feelings had been building up inside me for some time, and I justified them by claiming I was just being honest. When we first met, and in the early years of our marriage, Owen had a stable position at a major media company. Then came massive layoffs, and he was one of those who lost their jobs. That year was difficult for both of us. Owen probably sent out hundreds of job applications, and for months we lived off his savings. Luckily, he'd been wise enough to prepare for that. Eventually, he found a job, though not the one he had dreamed of. It wasn't the kind of job I would have wanted for him. Through a contact, he got a job at a mine, where he faced long and grueling hours. He'd come home covered in dirt, nearly unrecognizable. I understood that he was working for us, but secretly hoped this job would only be temporary. Yet, as the years passed, he picked up a second job as a truck driver on weekends. Balancing two physically demanding jobs, he provided us with financial stability, but it was hard for me to accept his labor. I worried about the future, especially how our children would perceive his work. Would they be ashamed to admit that their father was a truck driver or a miner? The thought terrified me. In the early years of our marriage, I wasn't a great cook, and Owen was always patient. He'd come home and happily cook dinner. But when he started working in the mine, he asked me to take over cooking because he was too tired to do it himself. I felt hurt, recalling how he'd once said he didn't mind that I couldn't cook. I even complained to my mother, who advised me to be patient and supportive of him. Owen suggested I take cooking lessons, and I agreed, wanting to become the wife he deserved, especially since he paid for the classes himself. I didn't realize that this would mark the beginning of our troubles. On the first day, he drove me to the class, heading off in his truck for a delivery, and I went along with him. I'll never forget the feeling of shame as I got out of his truck. I looked around and saw other women arriving in expensive cars, their husbands dressed in formal suits, and I wished that Owen could somehow remain invisible. I remembered how he used to drive a company car, dressed in a business suit. When he lost his corporate position, the company took back the car. I knew I was letting my thoughts drift into unnecessary places, but that moment set off a chain of thoughts in my mind that I couldn't stop. At the cooking classes, I quickly realized that they weren't just about recipes. They were also a place for the women to share stories of their husband's success, discussing their careers and the gifts they'd received. I found it oppressive. I wish I could say it didn't affect me, but every time Owen's name came up, every subtle hint at who he was and what we'd lost became unbearable. Everything felt strangely unreal. One day, after my classes ended, I noticed Owen waiting for me outside. He had just finished his shift at the mine and arrived in his new pickup truck to drive me home. His face beamed with pride. He was genuinely happy to be there for me. Although he was covered in dirt, it didn't seem to bother him in the least. With sheer excitement, he lifted me up and spun me around. His happiness was clear, and though I wanted to share in his joy, I was suddenly overcome by a wave of embarrassment and awkwardness. Other women looked at us, their gazes lingering just a bit longer than I would have liked, making me wish I could disappear. Fortunately, we got into the truck, and he drove us away from there. Honestly, the pickup truck was quite decent. It wasn't as elegant as the cars he used to drive, or like those that picked up the other women from my cooking class, but it was practical and reliable. When we got home, Owen went straight to the shower, a routine I had insisted on ever since he started working at the mine. Despite some initial annoyance over this rule, he accepted it without complaint, wanting to make me happy. That evening, I prepared a nice dinner, and afterward, he showed a rare moment of tenderness, a gesture we had missed for a long time. His work usually left him completely exhausted, and because of that, our intimate moments had become rare. Honestly, it didn't mean much to me. I'd never felt a strong need for physical closeness. But that night, everything felt different. And yet, the next morning, he was back to his usual routine. That day, I didn't have my cooking class, and something unexpected happened. One of the women from our group called and invited me to her place. Surprised, but pleased, I agreed, grateful for a chance to break up another lonely day at home. I dressed carefully, applied a little makeup, and went to the address she'd given me. When I arrived, I was taken aback by what I saw. The house was charming, tastefully decorated, not large, but elegant and perfectly furnished. Several other women from our class were already there. It was strange to see them outside our usual setting, though I had always suspected they shared more of their lives with each other than I did. Many of their husbands even worked in the same place. We gathered around, chatting about different things. I mostly stayed quiet, feeling shy and unwilling to draw attention to my comparatively modest lifestyle. Their conversation revolved around gifts their husbands had recently given them, and eventually, they turned their attention to me. One of the women asked about Owen's work, and I froze, not knowing what to say. Embarrassment washed over me, and I struggled to find the words. Thankfully, Vivian, another woman from the class, stepped in, saying it was too early for personal questions. I felt a wave of relief, spared from having to answer. That evening, as I prepared dinner, I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, troubled by my own embarrassment over Owen's job. When he returned home and greeted me, I barely responded. Irritation simmered inside me, though I couldn't explain why. Sensing that something was wrong, he came over to me with concern. I had rehearsed an entire speech in my mind, imagining how I would ask him to leave the mine for a more prestigious office job. But when he waited for me to speak, I stayed silent. Instead, I asked him to go take a shower, as usual. He complied without protest, knowing that I expected him to be clean before approaching me. When he returned, I placed his plate on the table. He gently embraced me, asking what was troubling me, and I told him it was beyond his ability to solve. Then, pulling away, I left him and went to our bedroom. That night, I decided to go to bed earlier than usual. However, when I opened my eyes the next morning, he was already gone. But beside me lay a bouquet of flowers. His small gesture made me smile. His care hadn't faded. I had a free day ahead, without any cooking classes, and I decided to invite friends over to finally catch up on what I hadn't done in ages. By noon, 3 of my friends had gathered, and we easily fell back into our usual rhythm, knitting and chatting about everything under the sun. While they laughed and shared stories, I was quieter than usual, lost in my thoughts. Eventually, one of my friends noticed and asked if I was okay. I hesitated, searching for the right words and unsure if I was ready to open up. She nudged me, jokingly pointing out that I'd become too secretive lately. Her persistence reminded me of my mother's advice. Don't air your relationship for everyone to see. But in that moment, surrounded by my friend's support, I felt a growing desire to finally share and rid myself of the thoughts weighing me down. Before I knew it, Tears were streaming down my cheeks. My friends gathered around, offering warmth and compassion that encouraged me to speak up. I felt guilty, yet I couldn't hold back any longer. With their support, I started talking, and once I began, I couldn't stop. I shared my disappointments, explaining how much Owen's defeatist attitude exhausted me. It seemed he had settled for a mediocre job, and that bothered me more and more. I admitted that lately, I'd even been embarrassed to mention what he does, especially after a recent incident that left me feeling utterly humiliated. When I talked about it, an understanding look appeared on their faces. Intrigued, I asked what they thought. Gently but honestly, they confessed they'd discussed it among themselves, wondering how I had managed to put up with the situation for so long. I felt both relieved and supported, grateful that they understood me. Recalling a particularly painful moment, I told them how embarrassed I'd felt when he arrived in that old wreck of a car he'd bought. It was one of the most humiliating moments for me. They sympathized, and one friend even joked, "I'd sooner give up an arm than cook for a man." We all laughed, but as the laughter faded, I realized how much I'd changed myself in an attempt to make Owen happy. I confessed to my friends that I felt overwhelmed, that Owen was no longer the man I married. I spoke sharply, admitting he had become someone we used to mock. And now, I was married to that man. My friends nodded in understanding and advised me to take control of the situation. When I asked how, they suggested giving him an ultimatum. Either he finds a job I wouldn't be ashamed of, or he risks losing me. I realized they were right. His job was draining me. I felt my life had turned into endless cooking and cleaning just to cope with what he brought home from the mine. I admitted that if he didn't quit that job, I would leave. I could no longer bear it. And I even confessed that I no longer felt any attraction toward him. Instead of tenderness, his touch left me feeling dirty. We laughed, maybe a bit louder than we should have, and I managed a strained smile, feeling a strange relief from finally getting it all out. But suddenly, the sound of a car door slamming interrupted our moment. An engine roared to life, and I jumped up, running to the window. There was Owen's truck speeding down the road, and my heart sank. Why had he come home in the middle of the day? It wasn't like him. Worse, I feared he might have heard every word. My friends tried to reassure me, saying maybe it was meant to happen this way. They reminded me that he would have found out eventually. But I was shaken. I hadn't imagined he'd learn the truth like this. I decided I would have an open conversation with him when he returned, and I set the table, waiting. But that night, he never came back. I spent the night on the couch in the living room, deciding to talk to him as soon as he came back. I wanted to address everything directly. He finally arrived early in the morning, and I woke up as soon as he entered. I greeted him, but he ignored me, not saying a word. When I reached out and gently took his hand to stop him, he looked at me and asked if I thought he was too dirty for me to touch. From that one question, I realized he had overheard my conversation with my friends. I told him we needed to talk, but he just shrugged, saying he was too tired and didn't owe me any explanations. What shocked me was that he didn't go to work that day, even though it wasn't his day off. Soon, a team of plumbers and builders arrived. He had arranged to have a small bathroom installed outside the house. This was so unlike him that I tried to talk again, but he wouldn't listen. The next week, he continued going to work every day, but in the evenings, used that new external bathroom before entering the house. He slept on the couch, avoided talking to me, and refused to eat anything I prepared. In fact, he stopped eating at home altogether. By the end of that week, I couldn't stand the silence any longer and decided we had to talk. Before he woke up, I locked all the doors in the house. When he got up and was ready to leave, I blocked the entrance and insisted we talk. He was indifferent, almost like a stranger, compared to the man who once left flowers by my bedside. He told me to step aside, and when I refused, he finally asked what I wanted. I just asked that we talk. His response was harsh. He said there was nothing left to discuss, accusing me of wanting him to quit the job he had no intention of leaving. He reminded me that his job, the very one I despise so much, had supported us for years. It paid for our home, car, clothes, and allowed us to save money while I could stay home. He accused me of being ungrateful and not appreciating what his work had provided us, pointing out that many of his colleagues were now homeless after losing their jobs, while I acted like I couldn't value any of it. Then he told me the real reason he came home early that day was to check on me, to make sure I was okay because he thought I might feel lonely and neglected. He wanted to comfort me, but instead, he overheard me speaking about him with disdain. I apologized, but he brushed it off, saying I didn't even understand what I was apologizing for. He walked past me, and for almost 2 weeks, we didn't exchange a single word. During that time, the essentials in the house began running out. Food, toiletries, everything. Since Owen had stopped eating at home, he didn't care that supplies were dwindling. When I mentioned it, he replied sarcastically, saying his dirty money from his dirty job wasn't good enough for me, and that I should find clean money to restock everything. It felt like I'd lost my husband. If this was punishment, hasn't it already gone too far? I feel so alone. If anyone has advice, I'd be grateful. Here's an update. I'm back because things have only gotten worse. I had hoped Owen was just going through something that would eventually pass, but nothing changed. He continued refusing to buy groceries or household items, and I was genuinely starving. I tried surviving on the small amount of money he used to give me, stretching it as much as I could, but I felt like a stranger in my own home. Desperate, I tried borrowing from friends, but they said they couldn't lend me anything. I even asked if their husbands could help, but they brushed me off, saying it wasn't worth bothering them over such a minor issue. It was awful, seeing them turn away as if my struggle didn't matter. They didn't even offer me food, giving excuses I can't even bring myself to repeat. I can hardly believe these are the same people I once called friends. I have pleaded with Owen many times, hoping that my words would reach him, but he has completely shut himself off from me. Later, I unexpectedly ran into a woman from my cooking class, the very one who once asked the group to stay out of my life when I wasn't ready to talk. Our encounter was painfully awkward. I was at the mall, trying to pay for my purchases, but my card was declined. There was barely any money left in my account. I froze on the spot, and she stood behind me in line, witnessing everything. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and paid for my items. It felt like a dream, a stranger covering my expenses, something even friends wouldn't dare to do. She also offered to drive me home, and although I felt humiliated, she sensed my distress and tried to comfort me. She assured me it was a small gesture and mentioned that she often saw my husband early in the morning with the miners heading to work. She knew he worked in the mines where the pay was decent, and though she didn't want to intrude, she asked if we were having financial difficulties. Curious, I asked why she thought that. She replied that she and others had noticed Owen's attachment to me, how he once stopped by our class in a new car, excitedly showing it to me rather than to his friends, who might have been more impressed. At that moment, my emotions took over. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and she became so worried that she pulled over to ask if I was okay. But the tears just wouldn't stop. I needed someone to confide in, so I poured everything out to her, trusting her with my worries. She put her arm around my shoulders and suggested I give Owen some time, to step away from home for a while, and to hope that he might forgive me. Quite a bit of time has passed since then, but I haven't received a single message or call from him. It seems he has erased me from his life. I constantly fight the urge to text him, but right now, I'm living with my parents. My mother understands me, but my father has been blunt, saying he's always thought my mother spoiled me too much. Looking back, I can see my reckless actions. I was careless, and even now, my own behavior baffles me. I lost a truly remarkable person because of my own mistakes. I let people who couldn't even manage their own lives influence my marriage. It's clear that Owen wants nothing to do with me, and I wouldn't be surprised if divorce papers arrived soon. I think he's leaving me in this state of uncertainty as a form of punishment, and it's tearing me apart from the inside. My father keeps saying that I rely too much on others to solve my problems, and that I need to stop sharing every detail of my life. So, this will be my last post. Thank you, Reddit. I only wish I had realized this sooner. After all these years, I should have known better. But now all I have left is regret.
This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.